All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another weekly live stream. The title of this week's episode is The Cost of Colorism, Income Inequality Among People of the Same Race. Let me put all of my stuff on Do Not Disturb really quickly. All right. So colorism costs us a lot, a whole lot. It can cost us intangible things like pride, esteem, confidence. It can cost us relationships. It can cost us solidarity. Colorism costs us unity. It costs us romantic options. It costs us peace of mind, self-expression, right? People feeling like they can't wear certain colors. But colorism also costs us money, okay? And many people can be kind of patient with problems and issues until those issues start messing with their coins, okay? And so colorism is messing with our coins. And a lot of times the conversations people have focus so much on the beauty standards. And I understand that. I understand where that's coming from. This series has been about all of the other impacts that colorism has beyond just physical attractiveness or perceived beauty. And I think the economic disparity is one that people, once they start to see like, oh, this is actually a systemic issue. It's not just about bullying. It's not just about, oh, someone was mean to me on the playground or someone was mean to me in the hallway, right? But that there are consequences in terms of people's access to resources and people's ability to support themselves. And so today I'm talking dollars. Please let me know if I'm making sense. All right. Y'all know I love a good pun. If you are new to this series, I'm Dr. Sarah Webb, the founder of Colorism Healing, and I welcome you. There have been several weeks of this, so please go back and catch up because there's a lot of good context and additional content and insights that you don't want to miss. And if you're a regular or if you've been hanging out with me for a while, I'm so glad to have you here as always. Feel free to say hello in the chat. I will save time at the end for your questions and comments if you have any, so go ahead and cue those up. Hi, Michael. Hi, Tiffany on LinkedIn. Good to see y'all. Hey, Hippo Griffer. What's up, Mixed Bloom Room? Yay. All right, so I have 3 research studies. That's how I've been starting my lives lately, is by sharing a sampling of the research on the particular topic that we're talking about for the day. And so these studies looked at wage gaps. The first one is amongst African Americans, and the second 2 are amongst Latinx workers and employees. So for the study that looked at African American wages and income, they found that the gap between white Americans and African Americans widened. The gap got wider as the skin tone of the employee got darker. And so when we talk about racial income inequality and we say, oh, Black people aren't earning as much as white people in this country, that is not static across the entire race. It's really a gradient. It really is a spectrum. And so African Americans that had the lightest skin tones, there was virtually no gap between their income and the income of white Americans. And those with medium brown skin tones, those falling more towards the middle of the human skin tone spectrum, that's where we start to see the significant gap. And of course, those with the darkest skin tones had the widest gap. I'll also say at this point that if last week I talked about biases in hiring and colorism in hiring, so you might be able to correlate a lot of the hiring practices with these income and wage disparities. Now, looking just amongst African Americans, they found that there was as much as a 14% gap in income and wages, right? And on average, it was 12 to 14% difference between those with light skin and those with darker skin tones. Now, the second research study, again, these last 2 are looking at Latinx employees. So the one study looks at income, but also overall socioeconomic status. And so they said that not only did the lighter skinned Latinx employees have higher income, but their socioeconomic wealth in general was larger, right? So they might have also had more investments. They might have more property, more inheritances. And so just financially speaking, the Latinx employees that were part of the study had a better financial outcome. And then the third study Again, looking at Latinx individuals with mostly European ancestry versus those with indigenous or African ancestry. And so the gap that they found was about a 22% gap, right? Which is even higher than what we saw in the study for African Americans. So amongst Latinx employees, the gap between those with the lighter skin tones and those with darker, more indigenous features and skin tones was on average are up to as much as 22% gap, right? Now, I don't like to just throw out the research. I think the research is important because, again, people really think it's just bias that is on an individual basis. And when we think about colorism as a systemic issue, we do have to understand that it corresponds and correlates to all the inequalities and disparities and inequities that we associate and attribute to racism and racial disparities. So I have four, because I updated this just before I came live. And so we have 4 takeaways and insights that I want to share before I jump into your questions. One is something I say every week. So if you've been tuning in every week, I apologize if you get tired of me saying this, but we have to resolve color-based income inequality if we ever hope to solve racial income inequality, right? And I've been talking about how all of the efforts and the initiatives and the studies and the changes in policies and protocols to create greater racial equity are for naught. We're just running on a little hamster wheel, spinning our wheels in a rut if we're not acknowledging the impact that colorism plays in the equity equation, okay? Now, the second takeaway is that there could be many reasons for these disparities. Most of the existing research, current research, has been focused on proving that there is disparity, right? So trying to find out if there actually is differences in pay based on skin tone, right? And so that's really, really important work. Shout out to all of the researchers who have helped to move the needle on this conversation around colorism by giving us data, by giving us things, more concrete receipts that we can point to say, yes, this is a systemic issue. And so future research, I think what I would encourage is thinking about why that disparity exists, right? Why do these income disparities exist? And so my hypothesis, any academics or researchers listening or reading the article, I would love to see research similar to the research that we have around gender and income inequality based on sex or gender, right? And so, future studies might ask questions like, are lighter skinned people more likely to negotiate a salary in the same way that men are more likely to negotiate when they apply for jobs? Or do lighter skinned people ask for a higher starting salary off the bat in the same way that men are more likely to ask for a higher fee or a higher starting salary? And then also, is there bias in the negotiating process itself? So last week I talked about perceptions of competency, perceptions of professionalism, or perceptions of intelligence and how that impacted hiring. But even if you decide to hire somebody, your negative biases or stereotypes could also be impacting whether or not you accept or approve of their requested salary or their requested hourly rate, right? And then a third takeaway or insight I want to share is that, and this one is a little difficult, so I'm going to try to be delicate in how I say this, is that if some people are getting paid less, that means some people are getting paid more. And so when I do this work and I see the resistance, I see the denial, I see the pushback, I see the apathy, I see people just wanting to ignore and dismiss this conversation, I have to acknowledge, in order to do this work, that some people are incentivized to sustain their relative benefit, right? To be complicit in the system is easier if you benefit from it, right? There are people who are harmed by systems that are also complicit in those systems, which we can talk about later. But definitely if you actually benefit from that system or that dynamic, then that incentivizes you to be complicit. And so to lighter skinned Black and brown people, BIPOC folks, you have to ask yourself, why do I ignore colorism? Why am I so defensive when colorism is brought up on the table? When again, if you look at the past 11 or 12 weeks that I've been talking about this, there are hundreds of research studies, books, articles, data sets that are showing the systemic advantage, the systemic power and privilege that you are given because of your skin tone, right? And so the only thing that I would say, because people have asked me before, why would lighter skinned people care to dismantle colorism if they benefit from it? And so I have always been of the mindset that any system that oppresses some of us is likely to oppress all of us, right? And so you're not safe in a system that oppresses anybody, because these systems ain't loyal, okay? These systems really ain't loyal. And we could talk about that, when we talk about like working class and poor white people who vote a certain way, right? Like all the things, we have to understand that if you are okay with your darker skinned siblings and counterparts earning less, that means you're also okay with you earning less. Because you're not going to solve the racial inequality and the racism that you're experiencing if you're unwilling to adequately recognize and address colorism along with that, okay? And then the fourth thing is we must remember that due to factors like compounding interest, that the numbers I quoted from the research studies are actually going to get bigger and wider across the lifespan of these people's lives. So yeah, if you're new on the job market, you're fresh in a career field, you're going to start out at a higher salary. But when you start investing in your 401ks, you start taking your residual income and reinvesting it, or just having compound interest on it. And then you look at the compounding impact of, well, I have more money, which affords me greater access to things like cars or transportations or living in a neighborhood that's close to work or whatever. That then feeds back into your ability to earn more income, right? I feel like I think in like these giant webs, and I'm like, it has these ripple effects across in a person's entire life. And so, yes, we might say, oh, well, a 10% wage gap, like what is that, right? By the time those people are at retirement, that is going to compound. Like that gap is going to continue to widen and increase. Again, not to mention all of the other opportunities, resources you're able to accrue throughout your lifetime and throughout your career because you had a little more disposable income to begin with, right? And so the compounding impact of these gaps, I think, is also something that we must be aware of. Now, I'm going to share your homework and your affirmations. I see some comments coming through and I can't wait to get to them. But just in case you have to leave early and you don't have time to sit through the Q&A portion, I want to share some homework. The first is that if you are an employer, if you work for a company or a business, request audits of wages and salaries based on skin tone. So just like you have data to see, are we paying, people equitably based on their gender? Are we paying people equitably based on their race, right? We have to also start doing that analysis for skin tone. And so looking at sometimes you only have one dark-skinned person, one Black person, or one indigenous person, or one Asian person on your job, right? And so you might say, well, we can't really discern colorism because there aren't enough other employees to say that there's a disparity within the race. And so what you can do is you can compare it to national averages, you can compare it to other employees of that same race in the field, right? So it doesn't have to just be at your company. This can also be across the industry writ large. And then the second part of your homework is, review all of my old content. Not all of it. Don't review all of it. Review the series on corporate colorism specifically. And especially the last one on hiring, because I want you to be able to start to connect the pieces and connect the dots and saying, oh, we do see evidence that there could be income gaps or income disparities based on color. Let's review our hiring practices and see, does some of that stem from the way that we hire, from the way that we promote people, from the way that we do performance evaluations to determine pay rises or bonuses and that sort of thing. And then your affirmation for the week is, this doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. Just because someone else is winning doesn't mean I have to lose, right? All right, so let's get into your questions and comments. I can't remember who I started with last time, but I'm going to start with LinkedIn and YouTube. Neo Soul So Free. Okay, I'm here for the screen name. Okay, Neo Soul So Free says, I have just found your channel and have been watching since yesterday. You're awesome. Do you have an email address? I didn't see contact listed. Yes, Neo Soul So Free on YouTube. My email address is Sarah, Sarah, at colorismhealing.com. And I'll also, I can post my contact information in the comments on YouTube as well. Also, yes, there is a difference in pay. I feel like you're right that they get us darker skins overqualified and pay us less to do only work harder. And a point you miss is that a lot of light-skinned women try to make colorism to only the Black male dating pool, which is not where colorism ends. Okay, so great points. Neo Soul So Free on YouTube is saying how, one, a lot of companies and businesses get dark-skinned candidates who are overqualified, and yet they still underpay them, right? And so I think that's a great point, is that not only are there wage disparities, but if you look at last week's live stream, the disparities do not correspond to actual qualifications, right? The qualifications in terms of level of experience, level of, certifications or educations, right? Dark-skinned people are less likely to be hired and are being paid less despite having more experience, education, credentials, etc. And then you're right in terms of what I was saying before about how colorism, our conversations have to move just beyond perceived attractiveness or, in this case, dating situations, and how colorism impacts every facet of life. All right. Hey, Aya. Always good to see you. Aya says, I agree. These systems ain't loyal. Okay. All right, cool. And now to my Instagram fam. Y'all know I love y'all. Let's see what questions or thoughts you all have. So over the rainbow, always good to see you. I don't think many light-skinned Black folks think about them getting paid less. As long as they're not at the bottom of the barrel, they're okay. Yeah, so over the rainbow, I feel like a lot of folks who are in relatively advantaged positions, because I even think about like anti-Blackness amongst other people of color, right? And how like realizing that aligning themselves with whiteness and throwing Black people under the bus is harming them, right? Like you're feeding into a system that ultimately wants to destroy you as well, but they don't see it that way. A lot of times they're like, well, as long as I'm not, on the bottom rung, like African Americans are, like Black people are, like Black immigrants are, etc., then I'm okay sort of playing that middle ground as, a non-Black person of color, right? So yeah, it's similar. I think it does operate in a very similar way for light-skinned people, for many light-skinned people actually, that having an advantage over someone else is sufficient for them, even if they're still not where they could be, even because the system wants to fail them as well. Lucid Lows, I miss you. It's good to see you on another live. Lucid Low says, how can we base this off skin tone alone? Won't we also need education level and experience info? Yeah, so all research, anyone who has read any sort of like academic research paper, so I'm summarizing these studies, right? I'm not gonna like sit down and read the entire article for you, because those things are like 30 pages long and they can get kind of like complex in terms of how they break down all the data and all the variables. And so I mentioned that I have an index on my website, colorismhealing.com, for people who want to like go and find the original article, because the original articles, they break down all of the variables that they've considered. And so I talked about this especially last week with hiring, that they recognize disparities in hiring based on skin tone, despite levels of education, despite levels of work experience, right? So they were more likely to hire light-skinned people even if they didn't have more education, even if they didn't have more work experience, even if their test scores were not higher, right? And so, yeah, in my summaries, I'm giving you like the overall outcome, the main idea, but the details of these articles are far more robust than what I'm able to share on the live. Great question. Is that the end of my Instagram comments? Okay. All right. Well, great question, Lucid Los. Neo Soul So Free says, I literally was doing 3 different jobs for 1 hourly rate. I work in property management. Picture that. Unfortunately, I can picture it, and I want better for you. So yeah, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. This is why I'm doing these lives. This is why I'm talking to companies, why I'm talking to businesses. I just want more people to be able to live and thrive and do it in a way that is just. Okay. Aya says, hi, Michael. I'm on my cell phone today. It's different. And Aya says, yes, as humans, we just want to know someone else is at the bottom. It's sad. All right. So those are all my questions and comments. Well, I have some follow-ups on Instagram. So let's see. So Over the Rainbow says, I can only imagine what pay and opportunities are like for dark-skinned folks with other marginalizations. Yeah, I don't have, these research studies didn't consider like other marginalizations, just other variables such as, if your skin tone is this, your test scores are that. And actually in academia, right, like the intersectional lens is something that has been known for a while, but like the application and research has not always been there as we need it to be. But you can definitely, I think it's not a stretch to make that analysis, right? To say that the more multiple marginalized identities you have, the wider the pay gap would be. Because even in those studies, they didn't even disaggregate based on things like gender or like citizenship status or anything like that. It was just skin tone. So, and then Lucid Low says, we always talk about relaxing our hair to assimilate. So I'm sure texturism plays into it somehow too. Yeah, that could be a live all on its own. I know for a fact that I didn't get certain jobs and opportunities because I had an afro, right? Yeah. Multiracial World says, along with not making more money to be able to have a job opportunity, we have to spend extra on hair and appearance to assimilate and be even allowed to have a foot in the door. This is money as well. Yeah, that's a good point, Multiracial World. So it's not just what you're not earning, it's also what you have to then spend in order to navigate a racist system, colorist system, a system that is steeped in misogynoir and all the things, right? All right. Lucilla says, I used to straighten my hair before every interview. Yeah, and we all empathize with that. We all understand where that decision stems from. And not everyone, what was I on when I said this? I was in conversation with someone or in something where I said, I have certain privileges that allow me to not code switch, that allow me to not assimilate in certain ways. In the same way, like, so if I go on a job interview and I have an afro, I talked about having the privilege of having a family that will support me if I can't find a job. And there are lots of people in the world who don't have the privilege of knowing that they can call a sister or an aunt or a cousin or a brother for food if they don't have it, right? Or people who have children and they need the job and the income to support their children, right? And so like my levels of privilege being solo, having a family I can fall back on, like I can take that risk, like I can mitigate, like, oh, they might not hire me if I have an afro, but I can make that gamble because I know I have other things working on my behalf that could buffer me or that could cushion my fall. And so, yeah, I think everyone has to make those negotiations for themselves. Everyone has to assess their own risk tolerance, because literally there are times when people could lose their lives. People really could lose their livelihoods. Like, people really need food on the table, water, electricity, you know what I mean? And so we don't judge ourselves and we don't judge other people for making choices in an effort to survive, right? All right. Thank you all so much for being here on this Monday and talking about this very important topic. I appreciate everyone who engages in the conversation around colorism. It's still severely underaddressed, but I think we can start to make changes around that. Also, I want to make a few announcements. So if you have recently seen my post, I have a workshop going live on May 13th. And today I just posted on Instagram and Facebook that I'm having my in-person 10-year anniversary celebration in July in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So if you are in or around the Dallas-Fort Worth area on July 17th of this year, I would love to see y'all in person. This is a big focus for me going forward into the decade ahead, is more events. Because I love doing these lives, I love reading your comments, but there's nothing like getting on a Zoom call or meeting in person. Like, I want to start connecting beyond just reading your comments. I want you to be able to talk back to me. I want to hear your voice. I want to see your image outside of just your profile picture. You know what I mean? So yeah, I'm excited about those things. A lot more that I want to plan. So just stay tuned, right? Like, if you can't participate in everything, that's totally fine. But be on the lookout for the opportunities when you can, join me in some of these events. All right. Yeah. All right. Lucilla says you have family privilege, not light skin privilege. LOL. It's true though. It is true. Like, I hear even my friends talk about, like, they can't rely on parents or, siblings, right? Really, for me, it's, being able to rely on my siblings. I lived with my brother rent free. He never asked me to pay the rent for a couple of years when I was finishing up my PhD. And, that made a huge difference. You know what I mean? Like, I cannot act like that wasn't a factor. So, all right, y'all. Much love. I will see y'all next week if you're able to join. Take care.